Good evening, Melbourne, and welcome to another episode of Sunday Night Live. Good evening, Brendan.
Father, good to see you. How are you?
Good, thank you. And good evening to Fr Marcus Goulding, the, what are we saying? The estranged stepfather,
Hello, Father Pierce, yes, and Brendan.
The ugly stepmother of melbournepraise.com. It's
excuse
Melbourne
me.
Praise.
No, I'm like the absentee father returning, after so long. And look, I find a wonderful, flourishing, almost adult child. It's amazing to see what you've done in my absence.
It's good to have you with us. For those of you who don't know, this is episode 26 of the podcast, not including the one that broke the internet. And but back at the very beginning, in those first couple of weeks, it was Father Marcus and I who kicked off Melbourne Praise. I was in quarantine. I just got back from America, and Father Marcus was in between sort of parish appointments and didn't have... Well, no, he had lots of time on his hands. So it started...
I did.
Very simple origins if you go back to scroll all the way back in the search history.
That's it. All we wanted to do was help people pray at home.
And from there, this has flourished. And I don't know, Father Marcus, did you expect back then that we would still find ourselves in some form of lockdown all these months later?
Certainly not. No, once we came out of the first lockdown, I think everyone sort of thought that was going to be it, and we were able to reopen. But it's amazing that you've been able to do with the channel, and I know a lot of people really appreciate the effort that you guys are going to keep it going.
Well, Brendan was there at the very beginning also, because Father Marcus wasn't too keen on a Sunday night podcast. It wasn't his thing.
Got places to be and people to see, even in lockdown,
And I thought to myself, who do I know? Who do I know that can talk rubbish for an hour without taking a breath and do it all from Wyndhamshire? And it was the son, the golden-haired son of Werribee, Brendan himself. Brendan, 26 weeks down.
Thanks, Father Marcus, for roping me into this because of your absence.
You in.
Just kidding. It's been good.
Pleasure, anytime.
Brendan, would you have said yes 26 weeks ago if you had have known it was going to last this long?
That it was going to be 26. Well, I think I probably would have thought about it for a little bit longer than I did. But no, it's been fun. It's been really good. We've had a lot of good guests. Any time spent with you, Father, is a privilege, and it's been good to kind of see our listeners and talk about some interesting topics. And I think we've got plenty more interesting things to talk about as well.
Talk about tonight, because again, I suppose the whole idea, Brendan, when we started was just to have a bit of a conversation, because we knew that amongst lots of things, as Father Marcus said, I suppose part of the whole idea of Melbourne Praise was getting people praying together, especially young uni students. But the other idea, I suppose, was that we knew that young Catholics were missing the opportunity to get together and just chat. So that's what we've tried to do over the last 26 weeks, and we've probably got a few more weeks left to do it, because
sounds like it.
We got some more announcements today, and it doesn't seem like we're going anywhere fast. But before we get there, it wouldn't be Sunday Night Live without Brendan's top 5. And it just so happens that I forgot once again to put your graphics back in, Brendan. Weren't you going to have a theme song by this week?
Yeah, well, look, once we get 3 weeks of having the graphic, then we'll work on adding some music to it.
This is like sort of...
And then we're going to get
totally out of this conversation.
The roadmap to Brendan's top 5. The roadmap to Brendan's top 5
great.
Graphics and music.
That's it.
We're in step 1.
I think the top 5 for today, I'm going to be... I could fill 20.
So, Brendan, what is your top 5 for today?
All right. Top 5 is top 5. Oh, how do we word it? Like, I can't believe you haven't seen this. It's the top 5 movies that I'm like, if you haven't seen this, I can't believe it. And it frustrates me at the same time that I'm doing this, because I always get slammed with this, like, what, you haven't seen? And it's like, there's 1,000,001 movies that you can see.
Me too.
But I think everyone's got the movies that they absolutely love, that they feel like it's crazy if other people haven't seen it.
Yep. Okay.
That's it.
let's start. So,
So-
Marcus, if you haven't been keeping track, 4
Yep.
through 4 to 2 have no particular order, but then number 1's number 1 for a reason. So, Brendan, what's number 5?
All right, as I go through this top 5, I want people in the comments to let me know if whether or not, yes, if they've seen it, no, if they haven't seen it, and then I want to hear from both of you if you've seen it as well.
I reckon I won't have seen any of them. We'll see.
Let's
Go
see.
for it.
I think Father Nick's gonna win this one, Father Marcus, just based off what you've said. But who will go? Here we go. Number 5 is Inception.
Love it.
Oh, I've
You
seen
haven't
that.
seen
Love
it?
that. Yeah.
Oh,
Tick.
good. Okay, good. No, I'm glad because I think
You
that's
got to watch it just for the
that's a mind
soundtrack.
bender. Oh, it is a very
Don't-
good soundtrack.
So, sorry, Brendan, how do you know the soundtrack if you haven't seen it?
I think you're misunderstanding what this topic is. It's me saying, "What, you haven't seen this?"
Oh.
Not the most. Does that make sense?
Oh.
Sorry, I feel like you and Father Marcus might have misunderstood. Maybe I've explained it very
Okay,
poorly.
so-
Throw that out the window.
It's the 5 movies you must have seen. You should have seen.
That you have seen.
Yeah, that's
that
probably
you
a
can't
better
believe
title.
that I haven't seen.
Yeah,
Okay. All right.
correct. Yeah,
Good to clear that up.
just throw out every other note that you've taken. Yeah, sorry. No, does that make
Okay,
sense?
good.
Okay, cool.
Inception.
So
Okay, I've seen that.
rebrand top 5 must-watch movies.
Okay,
Alright.
I've seen it. Luke
Good.
Bridz has also seen it. Jerry has said this should be called
Okay.
Brendan's Must See Movies, which I think Jerry would make a lot more sense than the title that we've given it. Lucky we didn't have a graphic.
Read
Go,
it.
okay.
Yeah.
Number 4 of Brendan's top
Number 4.
Must See Movies.
Similar strain of movie, The Matrix.
Haven't seen it.
Have you seen it?
What? You haven't seen The Matrix?
Haven't seen The Matrix. See, that's the
Where
response
were you in the
that we
90s,
wanted.
Pierce?
What? You haven't seen it? I was studying.
Oh my gosh.
Studying.
You were studying.
I was doing
Huh.
something.
If
The
that's like you
Matrix.
were studying in the seminary.
4, 3.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Hold on. The Matrix is brilliant. Like philosophically, oof, good
It's-
movie.
Still,
Guys, take
even
the
though-
red pill. Get out
So
of dreamland. Take the
And-
red pill. All right.
I didn't realise
Sorry,
the
I
red
don't
pill
read
was
it,
from the Matrix. What's the one where the 2 balls
Yeah.
come down in the chute, and if it's one ball, you're a murderer, and if it's the other ball, you're not a murderer? That's what I thought the red pill was from.
I have
Someone
no
in the
idea
com
what you were
box, if you
talking
know
about.
what movie I'm talking about, where like the guy sees the future, and then these 2 balls come rolling down, and it's got a name on it or something.
I feel like we're in the middle of one of my homilies. I normally have movie references in my homilies.
If anyone knows what movie I'm talking about, make sure you put it in the comments. Okay.
Yeah, Minority Report.
Minority
I thought I
Report,
knew
there
that
we
one.
go.
Yeah, Tom Cruise.
Haven't seen that.
Tom Cruise, I think.
Is that in your list?
That's
is
not
that?
in my. That's not in my list. No.
Okay, thanks, Evelyn.
That's a good movie, but
Minority
it's not a-
Report. Okay,
It's not a must-watch.
number 3.
Okay.
This is
Number
going
3.
off the rails.
The Marvel films. Like, if you haven't, like, there are some people I've met that haven't watched a single one.
That was me up until about the time I went to the Australian Catholic Youth Festival, and they were imposed upon me by our youth group.
Wait,
so now I'm
how
educated
many
on
of them?
Marvel. Probably 4 or 5. Some of the Thor ones and the more
Okay.
recent ones. Yeah.
Do you know
Okay,
what
that's
I,
good.
do you
That's
know what I
still
did?
all right.
And I, if anyone with long haul flights, so I was in America earlier in the year, and on the way over there, I looked up watching Marvel films in their chronological order.
Oh, I know. This is the one thing I can't understand about Marvel.
You get a list, and you get to watch them in the order that actually makes sense for someone who's never entered into the universe before.
I'll need to get
um,
that list.
And so I spent a lot of time on a plane watching them in order. I skipped a few, but yeah. So
I
okay.
feel like I should almost ask for clarification about what a long haul flight is. But
5, 4,
anyway, we'll leave
3.
that aside.
2. No, we're up to here we go. Number 2.
Yeah, two. I just wanted to say one other thing about the Marvel films. I didn't mean the whole franchise. I meant like specific, like just at least watching one of the films. I understand watching 20 films is probably a little bit excessive.
Yeah,
Don't
but it
even
would-
bother with the second Thor. But
It wouldn't be Brendan's
Number
top
2.
5 if you didn't throw something in there that was sort of a complete sort of game changer anyway. So you change the rules every
number
week.
2 is. I do. Number 2 is Lord of the Rings.
Oh, tick.
Haven't seen
I think
it.
anyone
Yeah.
who's on my Facebook knows that I was watching that the other day.
Haven't seen
Oh,
it.
yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, you have not
You
seen Lord of the
haven't seen
Rings?
it. I thought
No.
Father Marcus was going to lose this. He's seen every one so far.
How,
No.
You
how
haven't
can you
seen
call
Lord of the
yourself a
Rings,
Catholic?
No, sorry. And I did actually on a previous long haul flight try to download them all and watch them, and nah.
Wow.
And I've moved. I'm wondering, have I moved through this point in my life where I can get through the rest of it without watching them?
I don't think so. I think this is...
That's pretty
this
brutal.
This
You
is like
would've-
the secret of your struggles.
Yeah, I don't know.
You
So I
must
haven't
cop it
seen
a
Lord
lot
of the
then,
Rings.
Father. You cop it a lot then. Like people saying that you
This-
haven't seen the Lord of the Rings.
This
You
was
must
the
hear
one-
that like
this
on a
was the
weekly
one
basis.
this was the one that I was waiting for in this whole topic. I knew this was going to be the thing that would explode the combox. That people would say, "You're a priest and you're a Catholic and you have." No, I haven't. I'm sorry.
Yeah. If
It's-
we were a radio station, all our lines would be full.
Outline, yeah. Except we don't. How can you call yourself a Catholic? Thanks, Jerry. That's what I was waiting for. That's the kind.
That
of...
was what I said.
No, sorry, that was a quote from Father Marcus.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Father Marcus.
Don't worry, Jerry's on your side. I think sort of. She's laughing at the situation. I don't know.
Okay, number one.
All right. Number one. Just guess what it is, Father Nick and Father Marcus.
For you,
Oh,
What
Star
would you
Wars?
say?
yeah, you're a nerd, so
Yeah.
it would have to be Star Wars.
100%.
You watch it after
What?
your Dungeons and Dragons marathons.
Oh gosh, that's brutal. That's
Okay.
not fair.
Okay, Father. You didn't like board games. You said board games were for nerds. And then if anyone who's been listening from the start would know for a fact that you have now fallen in love with board games. So
You stand
I put
condemned.
Star Wars in that same category. Have you not seen Star Wars, Father Nick?
I have not seen one episode of any of the episodes of Star Wars. Ever.
You are a cultural Hun. You're like,
Is
oh
that
my
a
gosh.
Star Wars reference? Sorry. I am who I am.
There,
I am who I am.
well, we know that. Yes, there are no words
There's
to
no changing.
describe my shock.
There are no words. No. I am
You
who
come
I am.
across as so culturally enriched.
Star Wars is the one with Captain Spock.
Yeah,
Like,
that's you're running a podcast. Like you have
No.
beam me up, Scotty, isn't it? That's the one.
No. Star
That's
Wars
Star
is, Darth Vader. That's Star Trek.
See, I have two great jokes when it comes to this because I get this all the time. When it's Lord of the Rings, you throw in Dumbledore and people go, no, that's Harry Potter. And when it's Star Wars, you throw in Beam Me Up, Scotty, and everyone
Well,
goes,
I think it
I'm
references Star
seriously
Trek.
suspicious of this, though, Father. I don't believe that you haven't seen a single Star Wars.
I haven't.
I just don't think that you can get through life without
I
at
worked,
least seeing one.
I worked at KFC at a point where we were sponsoring a Star Wars movie, so my uniform was Star Wars for like a whole 12 months, and I still haven't seen the movies.
Wow, my goodness. Well, I'm glad that Melbourne Praise Sunday Night Live has descended into a movie reviews column.
Exactly. We're like Margaret and David,
Well, yeah,
for anyone who's old enough to remember Margaret and David. Can I ask the Combox and can I ask the illustrious panel of gentlemen in front of me, if I was going to sit down between now and the end of lockdown and force myself into watching either Star Wars or Lord of the Rings, and I was only to watch one of them, which one would I do?
Brendan?
I don't know, Father Marcus. What do you think?
Oh, look, absolutely Lord of the Rings. And especially for a Catholic priest, Lord of the Rings is essential viewing.
Yeah, I think it's
But Brendan's
and
gonna
not-
say
no,
Star
not-
Wars.
Not just the standard Lord of the Rings, it's the extended version, which I subjected myself to last week. And then you also have to watch The Hobbit, of which there are 3. So you've got a lot of viewing to catch up on. But there's a lot of lockdown still to come, so you should be fine.
How many hours is that? I think it's that would be about 16 hours.
Yes, the extended
to watch them all.
movies of the trilogy of the Lord of the Rings are about 4 hours plus each.
Wow.
And then there's The Hobbit. Enjoy.
It's not going to happen, but that's okay.
Watch it in blocks. Watch it in little bite-sized segments.
We live
We'll
in
get
hope.
there.
You can live in hope. Okay, Father Marcus, if there's one movie that was on the top of your list that everyone would have to see, or 2 movies?
Oh, one or two movies. Well, yeah, Lord of the Rings is great. I'm not sure. Let me think about it. Brendan, have you got any?
Brendan
Oh no,
just
we've
gave us
heard Brendan.
5.
Sorry, we've just heard Brendan's. What
I can
about
give
you,
some
Piers?
more. There's plenty more I've got
No,
loaded
you-
up. But yeah,
Well,
Father
so
Nick, what about you?
My top movie of all time has changed recently. And so it used to be Shawshank, which was always a big cliche. Please tell me you've seen Shawshank Redemption.
No. Yes. See, you're not the only culturally uneducated
You
person
haven't seen
here.
Shawshank Redemption.
Oh,
Come
look,
on, Combox. How can he call himself a Catholic? Like, Wizard of Oz. Mandalorian. I've heard that Mandalorian's good. I haven't seen that.
Mandalorian's a TV
it's
series.
So good.
So good.
It's so
Okay.
good. Wait, Father Marcus, have you seen it?
Mandalorian.
Yeah.
I've seen a few of them, a few of the episodes, not all of them.
Nice.
Okay,
Okay, well,
so-
yes, Father Nick and Father Marcus are worth watching them all.
It was for a long time Shawshank, which Father Marcus hasn't seen.
Yep.
Jerry, no, it's not
Mhm.
27 dresses. Gladiator.
Hey, I'm in
would-
my
I
dress,
would
so you
believe
just.
that, though, like,
I did
something
I did
there.
actually only rewatch Gladiator recently, so Gladiator would have to be up there as one of the best movies of all time, I think. But my new favourite movie of all time at the moment is Hacksaw Ridge.
That is a good film. Very good.
You've seen it? You've both
Yeah,
seen
absolutely.
it? Very good
Yeah.
movie. Very, very good movie. It's the best, I think. Ben, thank you. Very good. Father Marcus, you don't have your top movie of all time?
No, Lord of the Rings is very good. That's close to the top for me.
Go with that.
And that's 3
Nice.
movies plus
No,
The
that's
Hobbit,
good.
so I think that counts.
Okay, beautiful. But obviously, life can't just all be sitting back and watching movies. It's a Sunday, and many of you missed the opportunity to go to Mass once again. So, as we've been doing for the last few weeks, we take a few moments just to have a look at the readings of the day. For those of you who haven't had an opportunity to do that yet, we normally look at the Gospel, but I was asked earlier in the week to reflect a little bit more on the second reading of Paul's letter to the Philippians, which is one of those really wonderful passages from the Scripture, and so I thought I'd speak about that because I said in my reflection earlier in the week, I think it's one of the most concise expressions of faith. It's a creed almost in itself for us as Christians, and really sort of gets to the very heart of what it means to be a believer. And sometimes we have lots of things going around in our head and our mind, and there's lots of sort of elements of our faith that sort of challenge us and that stretch us, where it's sometimes really good to have something really clear and concise. And I think this passage from Philippians, the second chapter of Philippians 1 to 11, is really one of those times where the Spirit sort of really speaks to us. And it's this section where St. Paul tells us in this beautiful passage that although Christ was divine, he did not cling to his equality with God, but he emptied himself to assume the condition of a slave and became as men are, and as being as all men are, he was humbler yet and accepted death on a cross. And so it's just this beautiful summation of our faith, that at the core of it, we believe that Jesus Christ became man. He assumed the human state in order that we may be saved. And at the very core of what we believe, this is the truth. But that wasn't enough for him. And that at that point, he then chose to take the form of a slave. And we're doing a Bible study of the Holy Land at the moment here in this parish, and we looked at some of this stuff this morning, and the fact that the 30 pieces of silver that were paid to Judas to hand over Jesus was the going rate of the time for a slave. So
Wow.
Judas was paid a slave's wages to hand over Jesus. So like this whole idea of being a slave actually had that monetary value. He was bought as a slave to be handed over.
That's where, like, I find the more, I talk to Father Trevor Tabertsma, who teaches at CTC Scripture and was ordained with me, and the literal meaning of Scripture, the literal sense, the historical details can so often enrich our understanding of the significance of what's occurring.
Yeah.
I find that time and again.
Yeah. And so here he is. He's been sold as a slave. He's entered into this sort of slavery and this suffering for us. And just how important that is for us at the moment, especially for those people who might be struggling a little bit with lockdown, struggling a little bit with isolation, struggling a little bit with loneliness and with separation from their family and friends and the church, that we remember that our God entered into suffering for us. So not only did he enter into our humanity, but he then chose to enter into suffering. And the greatest form of suffering, if you know what I mean, he was spat upon, he was derided, he was dejected, he was cursed at, he was mocked, he was made to carry a cross. And then he was crucified, the most agonizing of deaths and the most humiliating. So he's experienced all of these things. Why? Out of love for us. But also that when we were to experience them down the track, that we would know that he's already been there. That he's already been in the isolation and the separation. He's already been in the pain and the suffering and the hurt. And he's even been to death. So death shouldn't even worry us because our Lord has been there already. So it's just a really, I find a really encouraging section of the scriptures because in our own times and in our own challenges and our own sufferings, we know that our Lord has already been there and that he's offered us a way out.
Yeah, and like to get really concrete, to speak of a slave is to speak of one whose liberty is deprived, and that's we know that the Lord actually entered into that when after Judas sold him, he was imprisoned. And at the end of my homily today, we'll talk more about what I was able to do today, but I referred to Viktor Frankl and his whole discussion of trying to find meaning even though our freedom is restricted, and trying to find purpose, and the fact that even though all our external freedoms are taken away, still we retain the freedom to love. And we see that in the Lord. He all his external physical freedoms are taken away, but he retains the ability to love moment by moment. And that's such an encouragement to us because we can still find holiness even though we're not able to attend Mass.
And St. Paul addresses this in this section of the Philippians as well, where he says there's only two responses for us to this great love that the Lord has shown us. And the first, he says, is reverence, that we bend the knee, that we adore the Lord who has loved us so much. But the second, he says, is that we must be like Christ. We must love like Christ ourselves. We must have, he says, we must, in your mind, be the same as Christ Jesus. So we must have, he says, to be completely happy, there must be no competition, no conceit. We must be self-effacing. Every person we must think of as better than ourselves. We must not think of our own interest first. All of these things that Christ has done for us, he doesn't ask for us to do them in return to him. He asks for us to do them to our neighbour.
And I think that's where it also, this reading marries up with the gospel, because the gospel, the Lord tells the parable of the two sons, one who says that he will do something but doesn't do it, and then another who doesn't do it but then goes and actually carries it out. And the Lord uses that parable to criticize the scribes and the Pharisees for not acting upon their word, for not being men of their word, for not putting their faith into action. And I think that's St. Paul's point here as well, is that our faith has to be put into action. And that's what, there can't be a gap between what we believe and how we live. It has to be completely harmonious.
Brendan, you're sitting there quietly between the two of us, yabbing away. Is there anything from the readings this week?
No, it's very good.
Spoke to you?
Well, someone in the comments has made an interesting point that's got me thinking, is that using the noun slave is inaccurate. And I thought that was interesting because, like, even in the scripture, it says that he assumes the condition of a slave, but he himself was not a slave because he laid his life down of his own accord. It was of his own free will that he entered into it. That there was nothing he wasn't put on the cross against his own will. That he that he allowed himself and he willingly went there.
Yeah.
That was what was on my mind. That's challenging. What that means for you guys, or what, in the context of the conversation, I don't know. But
and that, I mean, that's he has to retain his freedom. That's how he achieves our salvation. And I think he chooses to allow his liberties to be deprived. I think that's the beautiful thing. We've had it imposed upon us, but only for a short time. But he chooses it. He willingly enters into that condition so that we can attain life and freedom. And
he chooses to allow us to enter into it after him, and to unite our suffering with his suffering. He's given us, by suffering for us, a way of uniting in our own time. And I think that's the great hope for us, is that even today, all these centuries later on, that we can unite ourselves with the suffering of Christ through our own suffering, and thus share in the redemption that he offers, if we choose to. And so just like he freely chose, we must freely choose to follow in his footsteps. He can't force us, he can't make us. It's an act of our will, and he's allowed us to make that choice and enter into suffering with him, as a means of our own redemption. So plenty to think about and chew over in the week ahead. But we're really glad that you're with us, Father Marcus, and we brought you in from the very beginning because you were at the very beginning of Melbourne Praise, but you're also not like us. One of these things doesn't belong.
Speaking of liberties,
two of the men on this screen can't leave their house in half an hour's time. Well, the last night of curfew, but we'll get there. Two of these men couldn't go out to a restaurant and have a nice lunch today. Two of these men weren't allowed to sort of go and visit other people or have people in their churches or be in churches. But one of them was, and that's you, of course, because you're the assistant priest at St. Bernard's in Bacchus Marsh and St. Anthony, South Melton. So you're outside Melbourne Metro.
That's right. I'm living at Bacchus Marsh. So, Bacchus Marsh, I tell you what, people, there is a rush on property at Bacchus Marsh, and there is a wonderful little enclave of Catholic families out here.
Because you're there, or because they can get mass?
Oh, look, it's a bit of both, I think. But get amongst it, Come out to Bacchus Marsh.
Bacchus Marsh. It's actually quite a lovely little part of the world.
It certainly
Bacchus
is.
Marsh. So, for those of you who maybe aren't from Melbourne or have no idea what we're talking about, Melbourne, we are on step 1 of the roadmap to recovery of the Victorian government, but Bacchus Marsh is already on step
3.
So you're
That's
2
right.
steps in front of us, are you?
We are.
We're about to move to step 2, I think, as of midnight tonight. So
correct.
So what are some of the differences? I suppose, what did Bacchus Marsh look like this weekend? Walk down Main Street of Bacchus Marsh, Father Marcus. What did you find?
Yeah, look, well, I mean, under step 3, I drove down the main street of Bacchus Marsh last Saturday night on my way to go and say hello to some parishioners, and the Irish pub, wonderful establishment, which I'm yet to go to, but judging by the number of people there, it looks pretty good. There was 50 people outside at least. I'm sure they were meeting all the obligations of restrictions, but there was heaps of people outside. And there was a good number of people inside as well. Here we can have 50 people outside at restaurants and 20 people inside, subject to all the various social distancing requirements. So, I mean, from a social sense, it was great to see people out and about. And Bacchus Marsh, the main street, is full of people. And that's a great thing to see. It feels like we're on the road back to a degree of normality.
But what about at your church this morning? What did we find in St. Brendan's
now you're
church?
You're going to make me cry. Oh, look, this, in a sense, this is why I one of the reasons why I wrote a little piece for the Catholic Weekly this week and reached out to Neil Mitchell's program on Friday, because whilst our restaurants can have good numbers of people returning to eat and drink there, churches are only able to have 10 people outdoors to this point for non-ceremonial gatherings. The Premier clarified today that could be for any sort of gatherings, 10 people outside, and households only indoors. So single households indoors. So this weekend I've been busy saying masses for some of our families. I've said 4 masses today just for individual households, and I said some last weekend as well, and one last night. But it's hard going because, you know, we have probably 300 to 400 parishioners here at St. Bernard's, and you know, many of those are single person households. So to get everyone to mass when all we can have is households is very challenging.
And of course, it's really good, I suppose, to chat with you because we're seeing where you are now in regional Victoria, and we can assume that here in sort of Metro Melbourne, we saw today in the Premier's announcement that the dates have been shifted slightly, but it will be at least 3 weeks. But we can, I suppose, hope that in 3 weeks' time, we're going to move to stage 3. But the question of stage 3 for us, if it's like what it is for you at the moment, is that fair or equitable? And some of the people who are listening or watching this evening might not be aware, but the bishops of Victoria, so not just the Archbishop here in Melbourne, but all of the regional bishops as well, so the Bishop of Ballarat, of Sandhurst, and the Administrator of Sale, issued an open letter to the Premier on Friday, and it came out quite late in the day, so people might not have had a chance to see it. So I think Brendan's going to drop the content of the letter into the combox, but it's probably worth us going through because the bishops have taken a really strong stance. And if you were watching Daniel Andrews' press conference today, one of the ones that was different, I suppose, about this one from a couple of weeks ago was that 2 or 3 weeks ago, when he announced the initial phased rollout, places of religion didn't even get a mention. That was the thing, and I think Brendan and I spoke about it that night, that I was actually really disappointed about was the fact that 2 or 3 weeks ago, when the Premier of the state got up to talk about the sort of the return to normality, religion didn't even get a mention. Almost every other tenet or aspect of society was sort of mentioned or considered, at least in broad stroke, but religion didn't even get a cursory glance. Yet today, it did, and I was quite sort of surprised by that to see that he actually speak directly about how the effect of religion and the absence of religious practice has been on people.
Yeah, and I think Father Pierce, like the fact that even the fact that the Premier raised it shows the what can happen when we raise our voices about the impact of these things upon us and about significant issues. When we raise our voice in the public square, it has an effect, and people have to take notice.
Yeah. So I think it's worth probably having a look at a little bit of what the bishops have said, because I think they have taken quite a strong stance, and a stance that hopefully has already started to be a little bit sort of heard. And I suppose the first thing they point out is that over the last 6 months, all of the Catholic dioceses around Victoria have been resilient, well managed and safe, and at all times strive to act within the boundaries and maintain safety and a COVID-safe environment. I think that's really important because we're not out there denying the seriousness of this. We're not trying to put anyone at risk. And last time, I know that in the last interregnum, I suppose, the period where we were allowed to reopen up, we went to every effort here in my parish, and I'm sure it was the same in yours, Father Marcus, to ensure that it was done in a very safe manner and according to all of the restrictions. Can you, I suppose, and you're sort of starting to open up again, but that last time, can you remember a little bit what it was like?
Yeah. Look, and I think one of the, in a sense, I'll come to that in a minute. One of the frustrations, I think, in terms of the way the media has portrayed the whole COVID coverage is that anyone who has any concerns about the way these restrictions are being implemented is painted as being a COVID denier. And of course, as Catholics, we take what is good for the human person seriously. We want the best for humanity, and that includes physical health, but we know that it's not limited to physical health. So the discussion, I think, would benefit from being a bit more nuanced. But in terms of what we're doing in Bacchus Marsh and what we did do, like I'm not sure what you had in Melbourne, but we had 20 people attending Mass at a time. and we were running that on try booking, so people would register through try booking. We would have 2 masses. We have 2 priests here, so we had 2 masses a day during the week, and we had our regular Sunday mass schedule on Sundays, and we were able to get all our masses were full. Yeah. So we were able to provide the sacraments consistently to pretty much everyone who was able to access the internet and book in that way, or book through the parish office. There were still elderly parishioners who, either by choice or because they found it hard to connect with us, and we perhaps haven't done our best efforts to connect with them, who have still not been able to necessarily access the sacraments. But definitely we were finding a sustainable norm, temporary norm, under COVID, and people were able to come and safely access the sacraments of the Mass.
And and that's exactly what happened here. And I've got a church that seats 400, if you know what I mean. So we were able to very successfully open up for groups of 10 initially, and then it went to 20, and then it was about to go to 50, and we went backwards. But we were able to do it safely, ensure that everyone booked in, that we had an accurate record. It was all done online, and the place was thoroughly cleaned in between. And at the same time, and as you were saying, Father Marcus, we were still at that point strongly encouraging our elderly and frail and anyone who had any immune disease or anything else to stay home. Like, we weren't saying absolutely everybody come at risk of your health. We were saying those who are fit and healthy and who have no symptoms, come and let's do this and manage this in a very safe and systematic way. Yet at the same time, I could walk down into my local cafe and scribble my name and phone number on a slip of paper, not knowing where that paper was going or who touched the pen before me or whatever. Not to mention, and I think it was Evelyn has mentioned the walking around of the local supermarket. Sort of, how many people do you bump into? How many people touch the shopping trolley or the cash register? Or there's no real control in those environments. So there has always been that.
And I think that's, given what we were able to do and achieve coming out of the first lockdown, I think that's why the way churches have been treated coming out of the second lockdown has been so confusing. And I put a post up on Facebook today saying basically that the key issue is really around step 3. And at the moment, as Father Pierce has said, that's where regional Victoria is, where it's step 3, where we can begin to have a few people at Mass, and restaurants are able to open up a bit more. But it's relevant. It's not just relevant to regional Victoria, it's relevant to Melbourne as well, because this is where Melbourne is heading.
Yeah. And so the bishops actually address this, and they say the current restrictions in regional Victoria fail the pub test. If people, and it's like both proverbially and figuratively and literally, you know what I mean? It's
it doesn't match up with the pub here in Bacchus Marsh, that's for sure.
If people of faith, and again, this is where the bishops sort of say, imagine the same group of people, like a group of 20 Catholics can walk into the pub in Bacchus Marsh, they can take their face coverings off, and they can have dinner and have a beer, but the same group of people wearing masks, socially distanced, registered online, are not allowed under the current restrictions to walk into their church across the road and worship God.
And I think
that's what they're saying doesn't pass the pub test.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense. How can that same group of people do one thing and it be deemed safe and healthy, yet on the other side of the road can't do it, even if it's in a more managed and sanitary environment?
And that's when we actually look at the detail of how this works out on a practical level. Churches are actually safer than restaurants, because in a restaurant you go in there for 1 to 2 hours, you don't have your mask on, you're eating and drinking, you're handling plates and cups and all sorts of things that other people are handling, whether it's wait staff or the people you're there with, sitting on a seat that they've shared, all that sort of thing, the bathrooms. And in a church, we could have Mass where people wear masks for almost the entirety of the time they're there, all facing in one direction, except for when they receive Holy Communion. And when you consider how low the level of risk is in transmission when it comes to Holy Communion, that extremely brief moment of handing a host from the priest to the communicant, when you compare that with things like passing a cup of coffee at the takeaway barista, from a barista to a customer, it's such a low level of risk in a church when you look at the practical details by comparison, that it seems hard to understand how we are not able to open in the same way.
And in some places around the world with far greater case numbers than us, their churches were never closed. And they may have limited the celebration of Mass or public gatherings, but even in New York City, their churches were never closed for private prayer. So even if you were to say the distribution of Holy Communion was the greatest risk known to mankind, even more so than the handing out of a glass of beer at a pub, even if you wanted to go to that extreme, why not allow people to reopen their churches for private prayer so that people could come and attend a Mass and not receive Holy Communion, or come and attend a Eucharistic adoration or the Sacrament of Confession? So again, it just doesn't pass the pub test. And talking about pub tests, Matt Shiverus asks in the combox,
Hello, Matt.
Father Marcus, why not say Mass at the pub?
Well, that is a very good idea. I would love to open my church, and set up a pub next to my church.
Or serve beer at the church, or say Mass at the pub.
Well, we have theology at the pub. Why can't we have Mass at the pub? Mass should be in churches. We have a right to have our Masses in churches, but certainly maybe we should open up a pub next to St. Bernard's. Bernard's Beers. In fact, I was talking to one of our good parishioners about this the other day. We were thinking about opening a whiskey bar or something like that, and we were coming up with all sorts of names. Bernard's Brow House, that's what we were going to call it. So yeah, the differences are hard to grasp.
They are, and I suppose it is something, as you said, that we're worried about here. Like we're concerned for the people in regional Victoria. I think one of the really important things, and this is something that I think gets a little bit lost on people who don't practice faith themselves, is that churches, whilst the sacraments provide us with a supernatural grace that is unparalleled and can't be matched, and that's what there's this deep sense of spiritual longing, there is also a great social good that churches and places of worship of all faiths provide our society. And again, I've been not more disappointed that I haven't been able to celebrate Mass with my people, but one of the great public services that my parish offers, not just in a liturgical sense, but the people of my parish, is a sense of social connection, in particular for widows, widowers, the elderly, the frail, people who never married. There's a lot of our society that are so socially isolated throughout their normal lives, not just during lockdown, that churches provide a really important moment of social cohesion, but also social outreach. So that it's not just that our church is closed for the celebration of Mass, but that our staff and our volunteers can't come in and make those regular phone calls to the housebound and the elderly and the frail, those important links of social connection that have also been shut down, that I think we're just ignoring in our conversation about, if you know what I mean, and the idea of, okay, well, we can now have Mass for 10 people outside, but I still can't open my office for the volunteers to come in and to do that important outreach work. It's like we are more than just the sacraments.
I've experienced that directly by talking to parishioners. I've had several calls from people, but there's one that stands out in my mind. We have an elderly parishioner in her late 80s who called the other day. In February, she was diagnosed with cancer, and because of the restrictions on hospitals, she hasn't been able to access any significant or helpful treatment. So who knows how things are progressing there. But the thing that's been hardest for her, both spiritually and socially, is the fact that since March, she hasn't been to church. And as you say, just as much as there's a spiritual deprivation there, it's also the social side. She's a widow, and there are many in our churches, though we have many families in our parishes, but we know that some of our parishioners are also elderly and isolated. And for many of them, this is their main way. This is their main social outlet, and that's a good thing, and something that we can help manage safely. So
I think one of the things that we try to do each time sort of these rules come out is what's the rationale behind it? What's the thinking? You know what I mean? We always look for the positives in people and the decisions that they make. And so I sit there and go, okay, why have they come to this? Why have they come to this conclusion? And I suppose one of my great fears, though, and it's this, our care for the elderly and the frail is something that we are very proud of in our churches. But I suppose one of the things that I am afraid of is that it's also that our policymakers who are making these decisions and themselves, I'm assuming, aren't regular in church, otherwise they would know this, is that our churches aren't just full of people with grey hair or people who are elderly and frail or in the high-risk category. Look at Brendan Alliston, who's been sitting here quietly, again, listening to the two of us yab away. Brendan, what's your experience of going to Mass? What kind of people do you see around your church when you're allowed to go?
We're in an area with so many young families. So, yeah, the idea that the churches are full of people in a high risk category is wrong.
Yeah. And so again, it's like, are they keeping churches closed because they've thought in their mind it's only high risk people, we don't want large groups of high risk people coming together, if you know what I mean, so therefore we won't open the churches. And it's like, well, there's lots of low risk categories. And this is the thing, like soon enough our schools are going to be reopened. And part of being at a Catholic primary school for most of our students is that that they go to Mass with their class or with a large group. So there's going to be a question, okay, there's 30 kids sitting in a classroom, but are they allowed to walk across to the church and go to Mass? Because we're not allowed to have them gathered for Mass.
Yep. So, and I think, this sort of takes things to a whole different aspect of the discussion. But just in schools, like the no sacraments have been administered this year, and that is huge. Like we're working out now in regional Victoria, possibly being able to administer the sacrament of confession to kids for the first time, but there's been no first reception of Holy Communion, no confirmations, and this creates, this is not just a bureaucratic problem and an administrative problem for the church in terms of, we've got all this backlog. This is a lack for these children. But as you say, these are the children who come to our churches and who fill our churches.
There is, of course, that question also about whether there's an economic benefit to society. So we're reopening at the moment those things that provide a greater economic benefit to society, and what economic benefit does the church offer? But again, I suppose it's that question of what is society? Is it just those things that can provide an economic benefit that are the most important?
Absolutely. And I think they're the sort of broader questions that the church is in a unique position to be able to help our society consider. We ask the big questions. We put things in perspective. And there was a great article that, perhaps some of you might like to read on the National Catholic Register in America by Bishop Paprocki, who talks about a helpful way of using Catholic ethical categories to think through the way which restrictions are worth imposing upon our society, using the categories of ordinary and extraordinary means of the preservation of life. But he situates it within the broader context of, what are we actually protecting here? Why are we shutting everything down? Why are we isolating ourselves? And of course, the principal reason that we're given is to protect our physical health. But as a church, we know that physical health is not the most significant value for the human person. The thing we value most is the life of the soul, our spiritual health. And our history is littered with examples of people who have willingly forsaken their own physical health and even their physical life for the advancement of a spiritual good. And of course, the best example of that is our Lord. But for us, the soul is of primary importance, and that has to govern our response to COVID. And we can help society ask those broader questions, even if people are not spiritual or not religious. We can help them situate their physical health within the context of other important values that make for a healthy human life, like social connection, meaningful employment, and so many other things like that. So I think we have a role to play in helping broaden people's understanding of what a healthy human life looks like.
And I think this is the big question on the minds of lots of young people at the moment. What can we do now? What role can we play, especially as younger Catholics, in affecting change and making sure that our voice is heard? And obviously, I think the bishops have sort of led the way now. Do you know what I mean? They've sent a letter to the Premier, and I think that sort of sets for us an example. And I think it's time to get out the pens and paper, friends. I think it's time to start writing to your local member, and especially as a young person, speaking about these things that you're talking about, Father Marcus, about why the church is important to you. You know what I mean? And don't start out in an aggressive tone. Don't start out sort of bagging out sort of the Labor government or the hotel quarantine. All of that is for another time. But write to your local member and from a real personal level, speak about why your church and your local place of worship is important to you and what you see when you go there and what you believe is possible if we were allowed to be really open.
And I think this was the thing that perhaps surprised me or pleased me the most when I called Neil Mitchell or was interviewed by him. It opened the floodgates, and anyone who was listening or who's heard the podcast knows that there was call after I spoke to Neil sharing that same sentiment, that the value of the spiritual life and of being able to access church. And so I think, it's writing letters, absolutely. But, getting in the media is so important. And for most of us, we can't get in front of a television. We can't get on Sunrise or any of those sorts of programs, but we can call radio stations, and particularly the major talkback stations like 3AW and the ABC. We can get on there, and as you said, Father Pierce, we don't need to be aggressive. We want to come across as rational, reasonable, considered, intelligent, normal functioning members of society.
So how did you get on after all of that?
I know. I slipped through the nets, But if people, our lay faithful can now come forward and share the value of church and why they believe this is something that's important and why they think we deserve to be treated equitably, we might be able to actually get somewhere.
And I think the other thing that you should do at the moment, if at all possible, is as a good Christian, buy a coffee from your local coffee shop. Or support that local business that, like the church, is still being treated a little bit unfairly or unjustly, and that needs that support as well. I think that real practical. I've been going down to my local bakery here in Mount Waverley and keeping up with Jamie, if you know what I mean. And I suppose really just again sort of supporting them because there's lots of people out there at the moment who are sitting like us waiting to be reopened. So write a letter and buy a coffee. I think they're the two pieces of homework that you've got for the week ahead. Matthew in the comments, Father Marcus says, are you worried, or are we as, I suppose, priests worried? And Brendan, this would be a good one for you about your peers, that people are not going to come back. Some people have been away too long, if you know what I mean. I still remember when
I'd love to hear what Brendan thinks on that, yeah.
When I first came back, a senior priest said to me, it takes sort of something like 9 weeks to break a habit. So we've got to be back by Easter, otherwise we're going to be in trouble. And here we are sort of 9 months almost into it. Well, maybe not 9 months, 6 months into it. Brendan, what do you think about your peers or other young people or other parishioners in particular?
I didn't go to a Catholic school, so I haven't got a lot of friends who are Catholic that I suppose are culturally Catholic, let's say. But from the lot of the friends that I've made from around Melbourne and perhaps in my own parish as well, there's a hunger for the sacraments, and that hunger has grown during this time. So as soon as masses are going to be open, I think there's enough desire to be coming back to the church and be coming back to the sacraments. But I'm just imagining now for some of the Catholics that were perhaps a little bit weaker in their faith, not as certain about the importance of the sacraments. They'll be satisfied with live stream masses from now on. If they don't have to get out of there, they're not gonna be making the extra effort. And if there's any kind of way to get out of it, then unfortunately, I think we're going to see a big drop in numbers for young Catholics. But that's also at the same time as a reality of what the condition of the church was before lockdown. This crisis is kind of only brings to light perhaps some of the things that were happening before. And I think there were a lot of young Catholics that were lukewarm in their faith, and in times of crisis, that's when it can kind of really bring things out. It's either you're really hungry for the sacraments, or there isn't that hunger, or that hunger is being diminished. So
I love your reference to a time of crisis there, because I was sent just before the show started from Father David Cartwright a link to the UK Spectators podcast, a religion podcast, and they this week make that same point. They're asking the whole question of what is the effect of COVID upon the churches, but they begin by talking about a crisis, and one of the hosts speaks about how in Greek crisis also means judgment. It's a time of judgment, in the sense that it's a time where actions matter, and we see things more clearly. A crisis shows the truth, and helps us see the truth more clearly. But I think there's also a great opportunity for, because the people who might struggle to come back to Mass are our friends and family. And I think there's a great opportunity of mission for all of us to help coax them back to the sacraments. These are people who evidently found some value in them, but perhaps will have fallen out of the use of the sacraments over the lockdown time. And we have the ability to help lead them back.
Tina's just put in
Absolutely.
the com box exactly what I was thinking, and I don't know whether she was thinking of the quote I was thinking or not, but the church is going to be smaller but much stronger. And that is,
Pope Benedict. Yes.
Famous quote,
Praise God.
not from Pope Benedict, but from Cardinal Ratzinger. So in 2009, well, yeah, he became Pope Benedict, but he wasn't Pope at that point. But he was asked sort of famously, what will the church of the future look like? And he said, quote, "The church will become smaller. We'll have to start afresh, more or less from the beginning. She'll no longer be able to inhabit many of the edifices she built in prosperity. The number of her adherents diminishes. She'll lose many of her social privileges. As a small society, the church will make bigger demands on the initiative of her individual members. It's going to be hard going for the church," he says, and continues. But there is this real sense, if you know what I mean, and I don't know whether he knew that there was going to be a global pandemic there. And I think I've said to a few people, I think maybe what COVID has done is sort of sped up a little.
And that was the point that I think he was a bishop or cardinal from London or France England or France. He said that the pandemic has accelerated the secularization of society by about 10 years.
Yeah.
In the sense of strengthening the hunger of those who treasure the sacraments, and perhaps breaking what was left of those who were sort of hanging on to the edges, perhaps maybe slightly drifting away further. But it's something that's been observed across the globe, this phenomenon.
we're almost out of time. Ignatius R has referenced that Ratzinger quote to a much earlier date than mine, 1969, his Christmas Eve address. And
that's right. Yeah,
Ignatius is much smarter than I am, so I googled it. He's probably found the deeper quote, but it was in a book from 2009 as well. We're almost out of time. I think, though, Father Marcus, what you're talking about, this acceleration, I'm going to throw the challenge back out to the young Catholics of Melbourne as well, because it's going to then accelerate the need for them, once we reopen, to take up a much more active leadership role in the future of the church. If we've lost 10 years, if you know what I mean, if this is where we're at now, to a certain degree, and I'm speaking off the cuff here, but no more time for youth festivals and World Youth Days. It's time to lead your church. So that's going to be you can still go to World Youth Day and the festival, but also it's time to step up, if you know what I mean. Like if you've gone from being a 21-year-old Catholic to a 31-year-old Catholic, then it's time, and we need you, because we're going to lose a generation of leaders, and there's going to be a real need for the young people of Melbourne to step up. Really quickly, Father Marcus, we're well over time. We've asked every one of our guests, is there something that you learn about yourself in lockdown that you've sort of tried to keep going post-lockdown, or that you're looking forward to keep going post-lockdown?
Oh, gosh. Well, look, going into lockdown, I thought I would be fine, because I tend to be pretty happy in my own company. And I tend to recharge. I'm relatively extroverted, but tend to recharge, in my own company. And I think, I'm definitely at the point where I need other company. So I've in a sense, I've rediscovered the importance of cultivating those social relationships and friendships, and that these things are also very important.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Brendan. Thank you, everyone, for being with us tonight. Just a reminder that if you're listening live, to also download the podcast on Google and Apple. And you can also find us at facebook.com/Melbourne Praise. Just a plug also for Tuesday nights, Unlocking the Faith During Lockdown. We started last week, but each week is independent. So this week we're looking at divine revelation. So it'd be really great if you could join us. We had about 30 people last Tuesday night, and it was a wonderful conversation about the faith. So if you've got nothing else on Tuesday night, make sure you join us at 7 p.m. And all the details can be found at the Melbourne Praise Facebook page. Thanks, Brendan. Thanks, Father Marcus. Thanks, everyone, for being with us.
Thank you.
We'll be back next Sunday for episode 27.
Keep up the great work. Have a great week, everyone.
But
May God bless you.
God bless.